Great. So I'm actually very excited for this presentation because very seldom are spaces ever given to these very important subjects that require us all to confront some very difficult truths and histories, but also provide very optimistic avenues for what Native ChicanX solidarity will eventually look like. So going into it, I'm just going to give a little brief background of how the Red Nation has become involved in the struggle to confront New Mexico revisionist history. I will also say that in terms of discussing Native and ChicanX solidarity building, we're looking at it through a more localized lens, talking about New Mexico specifically and how the manifestations of Spanish colonization and U.S. imperialism manifested in a very specific way here in New Mexico that might not necessarily apply to other regions here or throughout the continent. So the Red Nation first became very visible in its challenge for New Mexico revisionist history with the movement to abolish the racist seal. Is it?
So it's, yeah.
Oh, it just needs time to warm up. Okay, cool. So if you go to the next slide, this was created by Roberto de Gestas. The seal itself did not include the skulls, however, it might as well have, and that's the point that was trying to be made. As you can see, it depicts a conquistador and a frontiersman wielding sword and musket, and this was the imagery that was used to celebrate New Mexico. It was created by a Scottish man who was a president of UNM in the 1800s. And as you can see, this upholds not only the celebration of this like dual colonialism, it also buys into the tricultural myth, which we'll talk about more, with the inclusion of Native people as a non-human image. That bird on top is supposedly there to represent Native people. Once again, reduced to our art. Okay. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the campaign to abolish the seal, but I will say that it included several demands, many of which pertain to the abolition of racist imagery, cultural appropriation, and the celebration of colonialism on the UNM campus. And this campaign has since then become a much broader struggle to challenge the celebration and glorification of colonialism, very much in tandem with what we're seeing on the national level. Some of the most prominent examples including the upheaval in Charlottesville and the challenging of racist memorials and statues all across the country. From the get-go, this movement started in tandem with the abolition of the Confederate flag in the South and the abolition of other racist university seals. And as we move forward in the contestation of the Entrada has intensified, we see that there's many narratives coming about in defense of Spanish or Hispanic culture that almost verbatim aligns itself with the arguments for the preservation of culture coming from blatant white supremacists. Does anyone want to say something?
So I have some queer stuff to say. So one thing that ChicanX and Indigenous people can focus on in building solidarity is clearing up the analytics of settler colonialism. A lot of Indigenous and ChicanX people do hold up the hetero cis patriarchy, which is contributing to the violence and murders of our trans queer family. So that can be a building foundation of creating solidarity with ChicanX and Native people.
Okay, who here has heard of the tricultural myth? Oh, nice, that's a good amount, okay. So, what I'm going to show is a visual depiction of the tricultural myth, for those of you who aren't too familiar with that term. Right here, okay. So these are actual murals that exist in UNM's Zimmerman Library. It's a 4-panel mural, and it's supposed to kind of depict a sort of timeline of things that have occurred here in New Mexico. So this is the very first panel. Take a look at it. I hope y'all can see it. Can you see that? Okay. So this is the very first panel depicting Native people. Looks like mostly Native people here in this one. And standing up, you see what looks kind of like Native people dressed in religious regalia, like Catholic, Christian, kind of like clergy stuff. Next slide, please. This is here to depict like the mestizo population, and of course they're depicted as like masons and like working in the farm. It's very stereotypical. And next one, please. And then here you have our Anglos. Speaks for itself.
Just like Trump.
And the last one's gonna blow your mind.
Is that a halo around the guy in the middle? But he's the only one with facial features.
Yeah, he's the only one with distinguished facial features. Yeah, so this is like a very this is a very accurate visual depiction of what the tricultural myth entails. So it's basically, number one, what it does is it reduces the populations of New Mexico to Hispano settlers, Native people, and U.S. Anglo settlers. So it virtually erases the complexities of the ChicanX identity, and it upholds a very specific racial hierarchy based on like the Spanish casta system, and it erases the distinct history of like every other group in New Mexico, like Black history, Japanese history, and so on. It'll constantly frame the three peoples as being in as living in peace with each other. It's almost always used in terms of like this celebration of a blending of cultures. It's always used like in promoting like the art that exists in New Mexico, or these celebrations of history, like let's celebrate this unique solidarity that happened here, when in all reality there was never any legitimate solidarity that occurred, only these fabrications of a palatable solidarity that does not exist. It also serves to cover up the continued impacts of colonization that manifest themselves through blatant state violence, resource extraction, economic inequality, contamination and destruction of sacred sites, and so on, at the hands of those who directly benefit from these histories of settler colonial violence, so whether it be somebody who aspires to like Anglo-Hispanic identity, or somebody who resonates with the U.S. settler identity.
So this can go into how a lot of Chicanos see mestizaje, which is mixed blood, kind of see it as this cosmic race. But the appropriation that a lot of ChicanX people are doing to indigenous culture is not cute. The starting point of appropriation of indigenous culture started with El Plan Espiritual de Aztlan. It was a pro-indigenous manifesto, basically saying that all ChicanX people are the descendants of the Mexica. No, that's not possible, and that it's also contributing to the erasure of the many indigenous tribes that are also in Mexico. So yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and I'd like to expand more into just not the murals, but the activism around these murals, right? And one of the things is to connect it to ChicanX solidarity and indigenous movements is activism around these murals really started in about 1970 with Las Chicanas, which is a Chicana feminist activist organization on UNM campus. They took out a letter in the Daily Lobo criticizing the murals. And these murals have always been a problem. And I think these murals were commissioned in 1930s, right? One of the things is, whereas referring back to Mecha and Kiva Club, Mecha and Kiva Club has always targeted these murals to challenge the tricultural myth, and there's videos in Smith Plaza in front of Zimmerman of speak outs against these murals. So what this is really connecting that even though appropriation of indigenous cultures can happen by ChicanX people, we can still very much stand in solidarity with indigenous movements, right? That we don't have to and should not appropriate indigenous culture, but instead stand in solidarity and challenge tricultural myth and settler colonialism.
So as a continuation of these various campaigns that are really bringing about spaces to talk about the continued violence that we're still seeing manifest as a result of Spanish colonialism, coupled with U.S. imperialism, was our very first Red Nation-sponsored action protesting the Entrada, which happened in 2016. I'd like to give a little background on the protesting of the Entrada and how it from the get-go actually required some very powerful ChicanX and Native solidarity, and even Hispano and Native solidarity. So the first protest was actually called by some former members of Los Caballeros de Vargas, which is the organization that puts on the Entrada every year. And they claim to be a religious organization, and they're very much Hispanophiles, claiming that they come from this like pure line of Spanish heritage, Spanish blood, which is like probably not super possible here in Mexico. Anyways, the individuals who called the first action for the first protest of the Entrada in almost 40 years were former members of Los Caballeros, and one of them actually served as the one who portrayed Don Diego de Vargas, and his name was Anastasio Trujillo, and his wife, Jessica Montoya Trujillo, was the princesa. So they played the major role, they played the key roles in the Entrada, and after doing this, their intention going into it was that they would be able to change things from the inside out, that they wanted to use this platform to talk about Pueblo resistance and to talk about history that had gone erased. And they quickly found that they were silenced and abused and belittled in that space when they tried to do that. The most that was able to happen, which in itself was very significant considering how contested these conversations were, was that when Anastasio was portraying de Vargas, he read the statement that the Pope had recently released apologizing to all indigenous people of the world on behalf of the Catholic Church. So he read that statement, and it incited a reaction from the Native people present, because each year Native artisans are asked to be present and kind of act as living relics of a bygone era, like sell their goods under the portal. So it was meaningful, and it was meaningful to the Native people there to hear somebody in his position say that, because it had never been done before. And following that, he and Jessica were essentially pushed out of the organization, and this effort to kind of continue to quell these conversations persisted, and it's only intensified since then. So I think what this requires, especially here in New Mexico, is adamant vocal opposition from people in positions of power, Chicanic people, Hispanic people, in order to get people, in order to like force these conversations into the mainstream public. And so in 2016, when Red Nation first did our first protest there, we were met with immense violence, snipers, violence from Entrada attendees, and it kind of set the groundwork for what we expected to happen this year. And it also showed us the lengths that the city of Santa Fe was willing to go to protect these violent historical reenactments. Go a couple slides ahead. Right here. Who here is familiar with what exactly the Entrada depicts? I don't want to spend too much time on this if everyone knows. Everyone here familiar with what it depicts and why we're protesting it? Hands, more or less. Okay, I won't go into it too much because I don't want to. So outside from this being just the protest of the Entrada itself, we also included a list of demands along with our political messaging. That is to prohibit the Fiestas Council or Los Caballeros from traveling and giving presentations in public schools. So every year, just before the Entrada, they travel to public schools and they pull kids out of class for this assembly and they make it fun and there's dancing and music and they don't really know what they're seeing, but they're exposed to this, like, usually before they're required to take a New Mexico history class before they really know what's happening or what they're seeing. So, this visual is already being put in their minds is something, conquistadors being something celebratory to begin with. Our second demand is to replace revisionist history curriculum in schools, and this revisionist history, like blatantly, like false history, is still being used even at a higher academic level, like in college texts. And the third, disallow taxpayer money from being used to fund a religious event because Los Caballeros is in fact a religious organization. They claim that the Entrada is a religious event, and each year, the Santa Fe Fiestas Council allots them that time and space to do this, and the Fiestas Council is funded by the lodger's tax in Santa Fe, and the lodger's tax is taxpayer money allocated specifically to promote tourism. So they are indeed funding a so-called religious event. So that's just a quick background. Yeah, I know. So after last year's Entrada, this actually served as a catalyst for a lot of on-the-ground organizing. Related to this, you see the Pueblo de Solidarity work kind of forming because this isn't only about challenging racist symbols and imagery. This is about directly confronting the actual physical and material violence that occurs as a result of these narratives being perpetuated. So we've closely linked this struggle to the violence that we face from the extractivist industry and how the normalization of the settler as the new native here, the settlers being conquistadors, frontiersmen, and so on, basically opens our lands, bodies, and resources up to those in power. And in this way you see the taking of land, the taking of resources being something continuous. There's another racist mural in Santa Fe of like a native man being threatened by sword. I don't know if you can see it, it's a little like weird and geometric. But that was actually also contested by several Pueblo youth in Santa Fe right after the Entrada. So after the Entrada, you see people being more vocal about these depictions popping up around the city, or just ones that have always existed around the city. I also want to just give a shout out to the Pueblo de Youth Solidarity Coalition because I believe that with these conversations around the celebration of colonialism historically, we're also seeing this contestment of neocolonialism, or just what it looks like today. And I really believe that ultimately it will be this Pueblo de Youth Solidarity work that pushes the broader struggle forward. And you want to talk about this year's Entrada and like any first-hand experiences?
So, at the Entrada, there's obviously, I would say they like to call themselves Hispanos because I'm not from New Mexico, I'm from El Paso, and what a lot of people like to do is tie their ancestry to Spain. So we usually, associate the oppression of marginalized people with white people. But at the Entrada, the majority of people there were Latinx or Hispanos or Hispanics. So that's already a problem because we're kind of idolizing, because yes, a lot of us ChicanX people, we do have ancestors who are from this village, but that doesn't mean you have to idolize them. That doesn't mean you have to romanticize them. And that is a huge, huge problem that is happening within that community.
So I was able to make it to the Entrada a little bit later. It was after Jen had got arrested, but Josh and I ended up going in the area where we weren't supposed to be. So it was like the locked off area where was it the state that gave the permit for that, or was it the city? Okay, so the city gave that permit, and they barricaded off. The protesters, but at that point, so yeah, Josh and I were walking and we were headed towards the barricade, so we were on the inside of the actual event, and we weren't really doing anything, and we just decided to put our fists out just to show solidarity, what had happened is it was just the two of us to begin with, but we had realized that right when we found ourselves up there, the police had already scoped us out. They were kind of just waiting and just watching us. But as soon as we started to grow, we had a mother and her baby and a few other youth, right, that just joined us and just stood there and put their fists up. We didn't have any signs, and that was our way of showing solidarity. So right when that happened, that's when 15 cops just started swarming around us and really started to intimidate us. And it was really upsetting because there was a baby with us. There was a mother and her infant, and these youth trying to stand their ground, and of course we ended up being harassed. So that was really, really traumatic. And it was just traumatic to see how our comrades were being treated as well. Yeah, I don't know if anything else.
Yeah. What Norma and I both experienced, what we saw with police surrounding us, what we saw with police protecting the Entrada, protecting private property, is they claimed that space was private property. And I'm kind of quoting Melanie here that the conquistadores never left, but they simply replaced their armor with badges. And very much that settler colonial violence is still here, right? And if you go outside that framework of liberal free speech that they put up, as they designated a free speech area for us, that's when the settler colonial state will very much articulate that violence upon us, specifically us, because as ChicanX people, as indigenous people, we will take the violence to the state firsthand because we have spoken out against it.
Yeah, so I think everything that unfolded at the Entrada this past year gave us a very clear, I believe it gave us a lot of clarity in terms of what the future for Native and ChicanX solidarity is going to look like, because it made very clear who the common enemy is. It is the violent state. It is those who enforce it. It's the settler state. And to organize around anything with that, I don't think makes much sense. There's several things that we can organize around, but I think when it comes to when it comes to prioritizing who the most imminent threat is, it is the foot soldiers of the settler colonial state, and those who carry out this violence in the name of protecting, the historical narratives of a bygone era. However, there are some very difficult conversations that still need to be had, especially amongst those who in northern New Mexico continue to aspire to the Spanish identity when in fact they may be, for all they know, may not even have a connection to Hispanic heritage. For all they know, they may be simply a tribalized person with indigenous roots. And so we see that identity is conceptualized based on what privileges it grants somebody, especially here in New Mexico. And this can be traced all the way back to like everything that unfolded immediately after the reoccupation in 1692, when the Spaniards returned after being pushed out during the Pueblo Revolt. And that is that upon their arrival, they not only continued to slaughter and murder, but many Native people were then sold into massive sex slavery rings that actually are the basis of the economies of most cities and towns throughout northern New Mexico. So indigenous lives and bodies actually built the wealth of everyone who continues to remain in power, from Santa Fe to Espanola to Abiquiu and Taos. These bodies built that wealth and that capital. And Santa Fe was actually one of the first major capitalist hubs in the Western Hemisphere for this reason. And what you get from that is not only the immense suffering on the part of indigenous people and the installation of rampant heteropatriarchy that still impacts us heavily today, but you have a lot of detribalized Native people who, when U.S. imperialism began to privilege those who aspired to Spanish heritage rather than any other kind of ChicanX identity, what you see is detribalized people resonating with the conquistadors as opposed to confronting this violent history that they may have been a result of these violent slave trades and like this intense suffering. And so I think confronting that trauma is something that needs to occur if we're going to continue to move forward in a productive way.